Awareness, the final frontier. These are the explorations of Jonathan Robinson and Brian Tom O'Connor. Their continuing mission, to discover fresh new paths to the mystery within, to seek out new joys and new methods of awakening, to boldly go into the heart of expanded consciousness. This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers. This is Jonathan Robinson, and I'm with my trusty sidekick, co-host, and friend,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
Good to see you, Brian. I just got back from a week in Mexico, so I've been rather relaxed with 15 fellow explorers. It's so fun to be with fellow explorers confined in one area where we just kind of bounce off each other. Have you had that experience for a while?
I do love actually traveling with other people. I remember going on retreats and traveling together. For instance, going to Sedona, Arizona on a retreat and getting on the plane with people or driving in the car. I really love that feeling of being in a group going on a retreat. Or when I did shows and I was in plays and stuff, when we did tours or out-of-town shows, spending time with the cast. I just love that camaraderie.
Yeah, community is so important when you're trying to do something outside of the mechanical flow of ordinary life. Yes. Because without that support, you end up being one with that mechanical flow, and you get into Christmas shopping and stress and all the things. And with my friends, we kind of made an agreement that we could kind of wake each other up at any moment, like say, hey, stop and take a couple minute time out, or practice some meditation now because I'm not enjoying being around you, or something like that. And, we just made that agreement and everybody was game. It was really fun.
That sounds like a great idea. I'll have to try that.
Yeah, just the simple idea of saying, anybody can say, take 2 or take 5, which means take 2 minutes to do nothing except try to be aware of the present moment or the background of awareness, or take 5 minutes and do that. And it's really a valuable addition to our days to be able to do that. So that's a tool that I recommend to folks. But that's not the main tool we're talking about today. We're talking about the magic of metaphors for describing this thing we call non-dual awareness and the whole consciousness and awareness game, so to speak. And I know metaphors are close to your heart, Brian. What do you know about metaphors?
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to this. It's a metaphor fest.
A metaphor fest. That's a metaphor.
That is a metaphor, exactly. Yes, I think metaphors are really important, and one of the main reasons that they're important is because it's actually extremely hard to talk about awareness and the unity of all things in concrete language. And one of the reasons for this is that language itself is about separation. It's about the distinction between one thing and another. It's actually built in. So it can't ever fully, accurately encompass the truth. So we use metaphors to point us there. And we know that they're not exactly the real thing, like the metaphor that the map is not the territory. That's a meta-metaphor. Another meta-metaphor, or a metaphor about metaphors, is the finger pointing to the moon. The truth is not in the finger. The finger is just the teaching, but the teaching is only pointing to the reality, which in this metaphor is the moon. And in our case, we're talking about pure awareness.
You said that well. What I like about metaphors is that they can give you an understanding of something in a new way that direct language doesn't do. And sometimes will help you to understand something at a very deep level. For example, if you understand, say, music really well, and you have it deep in your bones, if somebody gives you a metaphor about consciousness or awareness that relates to music, suddenly the synapses in your brain go wild and you go, yeah, okay, I get it now. And so a metaphor is really a teaching device in a certain way. for helping us to understand things more deeply or in a new way. And that's why I think they're so helpful, is because these things are hard to talk about in ordinary language, but a good metaphor will help you understand things. And one of the things I want to do in this podcast is present like maybe our top 10 greatest hits metaphors for understanding consciousness, awareness, and non-dual awareness. And so with that pressure-filled introduction, what's one of your favorite metaphors for understanding this whole thing that we're trying to explain?
Well, I think the best one, and it's funny because we actually mentioned this on our last episode where we had a conversation with Rick Archer, and we talked about metaphors and so how some people like some metaphors and not others. And he said, how about the wave in the ocean? And I said, oh yeah, everybody likes that one. And I do think it's the best. The wave and the ocean are not separate. A wave is not made of something other than the ocean, but we as individuals think we are separate from the rest of the universe, and we're actually not. We're actually just temporary arisings. We're actually made of energy, as is everything else. And so we're like a wave that thinks it's separate from the ocean. And we're actually just made of water, just like the ocean.
Yeah, that's good, but I can top that one.
All right.
Let me give you another
Go
metaphor.
for it.
Well, as we go through the top few, I like the projector and screen metaphor.
Yeah.
Which, we're watching a movie, but we're forgetting that it's just a movie. But I think you explained that metaphor better than I can. So give me your description of that one, because we've talked about that a little bit.
Well, there's a couple of ways of looking at the screen metaphor, and one of them is that, yes, we forget we're the movie. But there's another way of looking at it. Imagine you're watching a screen, and on it you see a character, and you see a mountain in the background, and we look upon it and we see that this character, this person, and this mountain are two separate things, but they're actually all made of the screen. They're not actually separate. So that awareness is the screen, and everything that appears on it is actually made of awareness, just like the images on the screen are actually made of the screen.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. And so what's a projector in this metaphor?
Well, in my version of the metaphor, I'm thinking of it as a TV screen and not a movie screen with a projector.
Uh-huh.
I think the TV screen actually works a little better. But if you want to go for the projector and the movie screen, then some people feel that we are actually projecting our experience. Our experience of the world is actually being projected from our mind out into the world. But that one I think is a little bit tough for people to swallow and believe in logically. What do you think?
Well, I agree with that, but I like the idea of the person in the audience. Like you can be watching, the watcher in the audience is like the watcher in ourselves that watches what's on the screen and is separate from that screen, but also involved in it. And whenever we want, we can realize that we are watching, in a way, a simulation or a movie, and we are made of something slightly different than the two-dimensional things going across the screen.
It's interesting because the screen metaphor can be looked upon in several ways. One is the way that you described, where we are the audience in the movie and we are watching the movie. And the other way is looking at it as if everything that occurs, including ourselves, including what we see, including what happens, is all actually only made of the screen. And there isn't actually a distinction.
That's starting to get pretty esoteric.
But it's just a metaphor. And a reminder, as we mentioned at the beginning, these metaphors I don't think are about helping us to understand some sort of factual, logical truth about the universe, but actually as we mentioned, a finger pointing towards the moon. They are to get us to look in the direction of awareness, as opposed to be looking at and getting involved in the content of awareness. So let's not get too involved with the finger. Let's look at the moon.
Yeah, yeah. And I think metaphors do different functions for different people. For some people, it's just an intellectually satisfying game. For other people, it's actually like a tool that helps them to be aware of the background of awareness. And for some people, it does other things. So let's look at a couple other ones. I like the metaphor of dreams. You know, it's so clear to us that when we're dreaming in night, we think that that is what's really going on. We don't think usually that this is just a dream. But then we wake up to another reality. And in the other reality called waking life, the dream is just something we create in our head. And then you can wake up out of waking life into called awakening. And then you see that this thing called waking life was just a dream. And I think that that's like really a far out picture. And it's almost like God has a sense of humor that, you know, we wake up out of a dream into waking life, and we wake up out of waking life into awakening. And it's not an exact metaphor, obviously, as no metaphor is, but I think it's a useful analogy for seeing that it is possible to totally believe something in one state of consciousness, and then you wake up out of that state of consciousness and it's completely different.
Yes, I love the dream metaphor. In fact, I think that is a contender for the top metaphor, or at least in the top 5.
Uh-huh. We should have a contest amongst our Awareness Explorers audience, their favorite metaphor for waking up to themselves. Feel free to email us about that. There's also, of course, the elephant and blind man, and, you know, depending upon what we are noticing, we're just getting a little bit of the elephant. You know, one blind man gets the trunk, one the tail. So depending upon what we are noticing, we might describe things differently. And that's always helpful, especially when somebody is describing something you don't know. You don't have to totally dismiss them. You can say, gee, that's a part of the elephant I haven't experienced before. That's very interesting.
And that's also a good reminder when we start to get bogged down in particular details, especially details of a particular belief or spiritual tradition. We sometimes get bogged down in the differences between this tenet and that tenet. And in a way, that's a little bit like only looking at the tail and saying it's a rope, or only looking at the legs and saying it's a tree. It's really the big picture that we want to go for, the one that includes everything.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, for me, this elephant metaphor was useful because one time I very much dismissed different religions, say, for example, Christianity, thinking it really had nothing to do with consciousness. And then I actually had in my 20s a conversion experience where I did become a Christian or have that experience. And it was like seeing, you know, a half of an elephant that I'd never seen before. And so it just made me realize that there's a lot to this elephant, and maybe I'm seeing 1%, maybe I'm seeing 10%, but when the subject is God and infinity, we're not seeing all of it. And having that humble perspective has been useful for me in being open to new learnings and new descriptions that I previously was closed to.
Well, I applaud that humble perspective, and I think that's really great to be open in that way.
Yeah, and it helped to have the metaphor. Otherwise, you know, I might not have been so open.
That's right. Another of my favorite metaphors for pure awareness is the mirror metaphor. Because one of the reasons that pure awareness is actually where happiness lives is because it's totally allowing. It doesn't choose what appears in awareness. And because it doesn't choose and it doesn't judge, it is actually open and allowing and loving. And it is, in fact, unconditional love. And it's like a mirror. Let's say you have a mirror, and on the table you have a cup of coffee and you have a pen. And the mirror doesn't say, I'm going to reflect the pen, but I don't like coffee today. I'm not going to reflect that cup of coffee. No, it reflects everything that is in front of it choicelessly, clearly, openly. And awareness is like a mirror. And I think we should take that to heart and simply, as often as we can, be the mirror.
Yeah, yeah. And one a little bit similar to that is a camera, which I like because sometimes I'll say, what would a snapshot of this picture be? Not just of the external, but of the internal.
Mm.
So I sometimes think in terms of snapshots. Right now I'm a little nervous, but feeling good, feeling a little excited. I see your face in front of me. And that's the snapshot of awareness. And in that snapshot, I don't exclude anything, just like a camera doesn't say, well, we're not going to include that in the background. It includes everything equally. And having the idea of I'm taking a snapshot helps me to get into awareness for a short period of time throughout my day.
That does sound helpful, and I think that's a really good one.
Something Adyashanti said when I was at his retreat a couple months ago is he mentioned just acknowledging awareness in quick snapshots throughout the day is a good practice.
Yes, I agree. Quick snapshots throughout the day can be really useful. And then, just like a motion picture is made up of many, many stills all shown together, those quick snapshots can join together and become a day full of pure awareness.
Yeah, yeah. I want to explore a couple of metaphors that really have a profound way of looking at life in a slightly different way. One is one that you might not be familiar with, and that is that pure awareness is like the conductor of an orchestra, and that there's the many different parts to us, which are akin to the different players in the orchestra. Now, if there's no conductor in an orchestra, all those different musicians tend to be out of beat with each other, and you create a cacophony of noise. But with a conductor, they all are now in harmony with each other. They're all playing the same notes together or the same musical score together. So that's metaphorically like when there's a watcher in us, when the awareness is more awakened, the many different parts of us can they tend to move more in harmony together. Whereas when there is no watcher, one part of us wants pizza, the other part wants to work out, another part wants this relationship, another part wants to watch TV, and there's no harmony among those different parts. What do you think of this metaphor?
No, I think that's a really good metaphor, but like all metaphors, they eventually do crash and burn if you analyze them too much. I think that's a really good metaphor for this reason. When we spend time noticing pure awareness, we actually do experience more harmony in our lives, and things seem to work out better, and we start to get along with people better because we're more open, we're more allowing, we're looser, we're more relaxed, we're more free, we're vibrating in harmony with the universe. The only way that I think that particular metaphor could be adjusted a little is that in a conductor in an orchestra, the conductor has a lot of control, and the conductor is saying, you should do it this way, you should do it that way, you should do it this way. And in awareness, it's actually the opposite. It's actually a certain relinquishing of control. It's a certain allowing things to be as they are that creates that harmony. So I think it's a great metaphor, but like all metaphors, you have to understand where it takes you and where it won't take you.
Yeah, yeah. You have to hold it lightly and use it in a way that is helpful to you, but not to so literally that you squeeze something out of it that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, and I was probably squeezing a little too hard with the with the interpretation of the controlling conductor.
Yeah, but you make a good point, because where a metaphor falls apart can also be a teaching experience, just like what you just said.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
I also like the metaphor of the radio receiver, and that really affected how I looked at the world. So here's my way of talking about this, that we're all radio receivers that can receive different stations. So when my friend says that they're tuning into the angels, I don't have to think that they're crazy. It might be that that's just a station that I'm not getting on this radio right now. Or they're tuning into Jesus or Buddha or whoever. Some people really tune into nature. Some people tune into love. There's all these different frequencies and radio stations being broadcast. And I am trying to become more receptive to receiving some of the ones that play the better music or higher frequency music. And in this analogy, you could, or metaphor, you could say that electromagnetic waves are the awareness. They're the thing that they all have in common that allows all of them to exist. And when I understood this metaphor, it became interesting to me and practical because it became like, well, how can I become open to new frequencies? How can I tune my dial more specifically to frequencies so that I receive them more effectively? And what's in the way of me doing that? Because if my friend is having tears of gratitude as they look out on this scene and I'm like, it means that maybe something's interfering with my signal.
That's a great metaphor. I really, really like that one. It's very
It gives
rich.
you something to strive for and something to take responsibility for, and to see that basically infinity is all around us, and how much of it are we open to?
Yeah. Another metaphor that I really like that has to do with thoughts, because a lot of spiritual paths talk about cessation of thought, or that you should try to stop thinking or control your mind. And I found, and many other people agree, that the mind will do what it wants whether you want it to stop or not, that you can't really stop the mind, that it goes on. But a really good metaphor is that you don't have to engage in those thoughts, and the metaphor is the train of thought. So imagine you're in a station. The train of thought comes through the station. It actually stops at that station. If you get on it, it's going to take you wherever it goes. But you don't have to board the train. You can actually just stay at the station and watch the trains come and go. You're not preventing the trains from coming into the station. You're not denying that they're coming into the station, but you're not boarding it and not letting it take you away. You're just calmly sitting there in the station, watching the trains come and go. And the same is true with emotions. So there's a train of thought and there's a train of emotions.
Yeah, that's nice. I think as a tool, what people can do is, we played with, I don't know, a dozen metaphors today, is say, well, which of those metaphors would be useful for me to play around with, to, talk to your friends about, to even the metaphor playing around with, you're playing with a metaphor, you're painting life with it, you're looking at life through that screen, that filter. One of the metaphors I like is glasses. In front of us, we all have different glasses. Sometimes if you're wearing really dark glasses, the world looks pretty dark. If you're wearing rose-colored glasses, it looks pretty nice. If you don't have your glasses and you need them, then the world might look pretty blurry and muddled. So, there's so many metaphors that can help us to understand the complexity of reality and hopefully inspire us to explore deeper in different ways. Any
Yes.
last metaphor you're thinking of?
Well, yes, indeed. When you talked about metaphors to help understand the complexity of life, there's a metaphor from Rupert Spira. And he said that experience is like a piece of cloth woven with strands of colored yarn, and that thoughts, sensations, and perceptions are like the strands. They're separate and distinct when we look at just the colors, but when we look at the whole cloth, they're one indivisible whole.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. And some metaphors really touch our heart. And I particularly like those because I'm trying to work on opening my heart. And I like that one just because it touches my artistic sense.
Hmm.
But you mentioned one more, which I wanted you to mention, which was the Mars rover metaphor.
Oh, that was one of my favorite ones that came to me a few months ago, because people have sometimes a hard time grasping that the individual body mind isn't actually what is aware. Because we think of awareness or consciousness as something that exists inside our brain and is looking through our eyes and is different. So I have my awareness and you have your awareness. And it's hard to grasp that awareness is actually not local. It's not inside my body, inside my mind. And so a metaphor I came up with, I first started with thinking about a robocam, and then I realized that a Mars rover is even better. So basically the idea is that you imagine a Mars rover, and a Mars rover is a robotic machine that's on Mars, and it has certain programs in it. It has a program that will propel it along. It has a program that tells it when it hits an obstacle, it's going to make a turn and go somewhere else. It has a program that tells it to take a sample of the atmosphere and send the information back. It has all sorts of programs in it to maybe take photographs of the surroundings and send it back. But the Mars rover is not what is seeing these pictures of its environment. The Mars rover is not what is deciding to turn this way or that way. The Mars rover is not what is seeing the samples of the atmosphere. It's actually mission control. It's back there in Houston, and mission control is the one that's receiving the information from that Mars rover. And at the same time, it might be receiving information from other Mars rovers. So we, our body and mind, we're the Mars rover, but pure awareness, pure consciousness is mission control.
Yeah, that's a nice one, a new one. And everybody's going to have different tastes. But I like that one because it does help you to separate your body from the real you.
That's right. Exactly. And of course, that metaphor falls apart too because, well, you ask who is mission control, and isn't that a person? And so it's actually infinite. So the person who's sitting at a desk watching the screen in mission control is also another Mars rover, and pure awareness is in the background receiving information from that body mind, and et cetera, ad infinitum.
Ad infinitum, all the way down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're going to guide us on a meditation, and after we do that, we'll have some words to say about how to make use of metaphors and how to invite other people to the party, which is another metaphor. When you start doing metaphors, everything sounds like a metaphor after a while. You can't get out of it.
It absolutely does. And we're probably going to have a metaphor episode part two, because there are actually half a dozen at least or more that we didn't even have time to get to today.
That's true. That's true. I'm looking forward to seeing how metaphorically, so to speak, you can bring us into awakening.
Well, thank you. I decided to use one of the metaphors that you actually brought up earlier in the episode, the dream metaphor. So this guided meditation is the dream meditation. So sit comfortably, take a nice deep breath, and see if there's any clutching or tension in your body, and see if you can, just for now, let it go. Recall a dream you've had, any dream. The content doesn't matter. Any dream that you remember having. Recall the events in the dream and notice what was happening and where it was happening, the environment in which it was happening, and most importantly, who was it happening to? Who was the person experiencing the events in the dream? whether running away from something or driving a car or eating or flying or falling or whatever. Let's call the person having that dream the dream character. In the dream, of course, it feels like you. The dream happens to you, but often the dream character is not exactly the same as the you today. For example, it might be a younger you, or maybe a different person altogether. So imagine you are the dream character in the dream environment, taking part in the dream events. Really visualize it in your imagination. Now imagine that you've woken up from the dream and you realize that you're not in that dream environment or involved in those dream events. You're lying in your bed at the present time with your present body at your present age. What happened to the dream character? Was the dream character real? Did the dream character wake up? What was the dream character made of? The dream character was made of the content of the dreamer's mind. That is, of your mind. Now imagine you're dreaming the exact experience you're having now. Perhaps you're sitting in a chair listening to this podcast. Everything in the dream is exactly as it appears to you now, except you're dreaming. Now imagine that you wake up. Who has woken up? You? But you were the dream character. What was the dream made of? What were you, the dream character, made of? Imagine just for now that what has woken up was awareness. That what had experienced the dream was simply awareness. It's awareness's dream. That everything that happened in the dream, including you and all your experiences, happened in awareness's mind. It was made of awareness's mind, which is to say, made of awareness. Now, simply notice your present experience. Notice that it appears to be happening to you. But just for now, imagine that everything in your experience, the sights, the sounds, the body sensations, the other people, you yourself, everything is simply made of awareness. Awareness is dreaming you having this experience. Everything you experience is made of awareness's mind, which is to say, of awareness itself. Now imagine you are pure awareness in which all experience appears, and you've just woken up from the dream of being in a body, in a room, listening to a voice. Now stop imagining anything and take a few moments to simply be. And when you're ready, at your own pace, open your eyes and return to reality. Or is it?
I had one of those weird moments where when you said, imagine that you're dreaming like being you, where I kind of realized, yeah, Jonathan is a dream, a figment of my imagination. That was a weird moment because, it was like waking up out of a dream. I love those moments.
I think that's great. I love those moments too.
You have just entered the twilight zone. Yeah, it gets pretty twilight twilight zone-y, if that's a good metaphor that we can describe.
That's another metaphor that we can put in the metaphor mill.
Yep. Another metaphor to end with is the more people you have at the party, the more rockin' the party is. And so please tell your friends, family, enemies, whoever is around you, that if you're getting value from this, that they might enjoy expanding their own mind without even needing any drugs to get there.
There's a metaphor right there.
Yep, yep. Uh-oh, I can't stop! Help!
This is the high without drugs.
Yes. I'm lost in a sea of metaphors.
That sounds like something from Yellow Submarine. What was it? The Sea of Holes.
Uh-huh. But, yeah, feel free to look at the world through one of those metaphors. I think the one I'm going to use this week is the radio receiver, being open to new frequencies, dialing into certain frequencies, whether it be nature or love or Christ energy or whatever, or just the frequency underlying it all, the pure awareness, the energy waves that allow all of this to happen. And I'm wishing you, Brian, and all our listeners the best of their explorations on the sea of energy and metaphors and everything else that we've talked about today. And till next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring. Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or your favorite podcast app. And we'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love. It was a fun conversation, don't you think?
Yeah, no, it was fun conversation.
Yeah, had a lot of food for thought. That was another metaphor.
How do you speak without metaphors? It's almost,
it is. Well, speech itself is a metaphor.
That's true. That's true.
And I didn't even talk about how pure awareness is as pure awareness is, as Jeffrey Martin of the Finder's Course says, non-symbolic experience.
Right.
And so metaphors are just ways to take us to non-symbolic experience. But because they're a symbol itself, we have to actually jettison the metaphor after we see what it's pointing to.
Right, right. That would have been a good thing to say.
Well, I'm still recording. I might be able to stick it in somewhere.
Great, great.
I know this is a really great topic because we could just go on and on.
Uh-huh.